To quote one of my favorite YouTubers, Pro Jared, every single one of us has that one game. That one game that's more important to you than any other game before it. That one that had a profound effect on you and shaped who you are as a person. For him, that game was Final Fantasy VI. For me, that game was Dragon Age Origins. It is my favorite game of all time, and I'm pretty sure the reason I love RPGs as much as I do today is because of this one. You may be asking yourself, what is it about this game that stuck with you along with hundreds if not thousands of others for so long? What is it about this game that has made it a virtual guarantee to appear somewhere on any given top RPGs of all time list? Well, that is what we are going to explore today. Hello there, my name is WookieeJedi, and this is Season 2 of Oldies but Goodies. Dragon Age Origins is a treasure trove of information. In my research, I discovered a ton of development history associated with the game. I'll do my best to talk about the most relevant details, so sit back and enjoy. This is going to be a fun ride. The game was developed by the Edmonton studio BioWare, and development began all the way back in November of 2002. BioWare tried its best to keep any information about the game secret from the public. More than 180 people worked on the game, and full-scale production began 3 years after the game's initial development. The title Origins was chosen to represent the 6 origin stories of the game, as well as the beginning of a new franchise. The guys at BioWare stated that this game was a spiritual successor to Neverwinter Nights and Baldur's Gate, 2 games that take place in the world of Dungeons & Dragons. They essentially wanted to create a similar fantasy RPG without any of the issues and restrictions that come from having to license properties. The world of Dragon Age Origins was built first and the story then followed. According to lead writer David Gator, the development team chose a fantasy setting because, and I quote, game director Dan Tudge, that BioWare was at its best in the fantasy genre. And it's hard to deny that. Though they have had massive successes with sci-fi games such as Mass Effect, and another personal favorite of mine that's probably tied, if not a close second to me, if not a close second with Dragon Age Origins as my favorite game of all time, Knights of the Old Republic. I have to agree with Dan Tudge when he says that BioWare is at its best in the fantasy genre. The first draft of the game looked vastly different to the finished product. In the first draft there were no Darkspawn, no Grey Wardens, and mages couldn't use magic in cities. Whew. Wonder what the hell they were going to make the game about. There were also 12 origin stories instead of 6, including a human commoner and an Avar, a barbarian origin. Now, full disclosure, I was kind of disappointed when I found this out. I would have loved to have been a barbarian. But most of the other stories were unfortunately cut for being seen as, and I'm quoting here, too ridiculous. This just raises more interest in what they thought was ridiculous, because it could have been fun. The fantasy element of Dragon Age Origins was described by the co-founder of BioWare, Greg Zeshuk, as a cross between authors J.R.R. Tolkien and George R.R. Martin. The ultimate goal was to create a dark heroic fantasy that would appeal to any fan of the genre, and I think they succeeded. Dragon Age Origins has been described as a social experience, with the narrative and variety of different paths the player can take as an integral part of the gameplay. Every character the player meets, every item they collect, every quest they receive and complete will take players to completely different experiences. This is what I feel stands out the most with Origins. I feel you can talk to 10 different people who played the game, and each person will give their own responses. It can tell you a lot of their playstyle, decisions, and how they approach fantasy RPGs like this. That is really fascinating. It is without a doubt BioWare was aiming big with this game. Many in the development team hoped that Origins would become the Lord of the Rings of the video game franchise. After all was said and done, I believe they succeeded and then some. This is a section of my reviews normally reserved for something like a fighting game or a platformer. I felt it was a topic that needed to be discussed here, as Origins has some of the best and most unique characters in any RPG that I've ever played. Let's start with Alistair, who could appropriately be described as your wisecracking best friend who would be the guy to get drunk and make an inappropriate toast at your wedding. He was always one of my favorite characters, his attitude is great, and his jokes were always funny. Not to mention the fact that he is voiced by the very talented and very underrated actor Steve Valentine. Alistair also has a great backstory and a story arc that I dare not spoil for you here. Next up is Morrigan, a fan favorite. She's not only the resident seductive witch of the group, but also the character who puts things, shall I say, bluntly, and is completely unapologetic of everything she says. Morgan is another character with a great story. The story of someone breaking away from their controlling mother, and the story of someone who has been isolated her whole life, initially coming off as cold and uncaring, slowly coming out of her shell, making new friends, and depending on whether or not you romance her, falling in love for the first time. But don't let her beauty fool you. She is also a strong, fiery temptress, who is one of the most powerful mages on the planet. Next up is by far my favorite character in the game and one of my favorite characters in all of the Dragon Age series as a whole, Oghren. He is literally the drunken dwarf. I've always had an affinity towards dwarves when it comes to this series and within fantasy as a whole. I guess you could say they're the Wookiees of the fantasy genre for me. But Oghren definitely cemented my love of them. He is constantly drunk and is almost funnier than Alistair most of the time. And of course has a great story attached. This too I won't give away as it's my favorite one by far. It's an incredible arc. But let's just say there's a reason he started drinking. But even after everything gets resolved, he continues drinking just for fun. He's just a great dude with a great big axe. Next up is your dog. That's right, you heard me right. You get your own dog. It's a big, strong Mabari warhound that you adopt, and you even get to name it. It's pretty freaking cool. My personal favorite name for the dog is Barkspawn, because puns are awesome. Then there's Liliana, the other female romance option. She is a rogue and a bard, and she is as cute as Morgan is sultry. And she has the voice of an angel. Seriously, listen to her sing in the story, it's like, Liliana. Anyways, she was another one of my favorites, due in no small part to the fact that you need a rogue with you everywhere, and I mean everywhere, or you will miss out on a lot of loot. That, and she is also the moral compass of the group. A former sister in the Chantry, she is always looking on the brighter side of things, but also has a strong sense of what's right, and typically doesn't tolerate it if your character strays from the straight and narrow. Then there's Shale, a pretty fitting name for a golem. Yes, you heard me right, a freaking golem. Now bear in mind, this is no ordinary golem. For starters, this one has free will, which is pretty cool because that means that she willingly follows you and becomes your friend. She is smaller than most of the other golems you run into throughout the game due to the fact that her various owners over the years were like carving her and making various modifications to her body. But I think the trade-off in size is worth it for everything else you get in return. For starters, her personality is to die for. She hates birds. A lot. Her smaller head gives her a more expressive face. Her strength and constitution make her a walking tank. And best of all, in place of giving her armor and weapons, you give her crystals. That makes her more resistant to certain elements in terms of the armor portion. And give her elemental punches. If you've ever wanted to see Pokemon in like a fantasy RPG setting, you could almost have it here. Graveler, use Fire Punch! Then we have Zevran, an elf from the kingdom of Antiva. He is an assassin who originally starts out getting hired to kill you, but after you and your party thoroughly kick his ass, he joins you in your fight. He's a valuable member of the team and a great friend, who as long as you treat him right will follow you to hell and back, and is with you until the very end. Finally, there is Sten and Wynn. Now, I lumped these two characters together because they are, quite frankly, my least favorite characters. Wynn is an old mage lady, and Sten is a large Kunari man. I honestly don't know what it is about these two that I've never really liked. I don't know, they just always kind of rub me the wrong way. Maybe just because there's better versions of them, I guess. Like, I don't know, like, you know, Morrigan's a better version of Wynn, at least in my opinion. And then Sten is alright, he just kind of has a... I don't know how to describe it. He has a really weird personality that I just don't really like. You get another two-handed warrior friend in Oghren, so there's that. And then also, I understand that this was like, you know, early days of Dragon Age and everything, but like, Sten doesn't look like a Kunari. Like, especially when you look compared to like Dragon Age 2 and Dragon Age Inquisition, he just looks like a really tall man. Like, he doesn't have the different colored skin, he doesn't have horns, so it's just, I don't know. I just don't like those two. So I'm sure you're wondering, what is my personal connection to this game? Well, despite what you may be thinking based on what I've said with my other reviews, I did not discover this game as a child. Mostly because the game came out in 2009 when I was a junior in high school. But I did not discover the game until well after its initial release. The earliest memory I have of the game, or rather the Dragon Age series, was working my job at a sports bar my senior year in high school, and seeing a commercial for Dragon Age 2 come on the TV and thinking, that game looks kinda dumb. Fast forward sometime later, I stopped by my local GameStop, and despite my initial reaction to Dragon Age, I went there not only to pre-order Dragon Age Inquisition, as trailers had been releasing for that and it looked really cool, but I also went there to get caught up with the series. Thanks to the friendly staff there, I went home with lots of great suggestions and information. In particular, Dragon Age Origins was recommended strongly, and when I came back home, I turned on my 360 and started playing right away. I was absolutely amazed and blown away by this game. I won't sugarcoat it, my first playthrough kind of sucked. Or rather, I kind of sucked. I only unlocked 5 of the 8 companions and was betrayed by Tavern. With all that being said, however, I still love the game and have replayed it numerous times. Dragon Age Origins has been with me through all the changes in my life, positive, negative, and somewhere in between since then. Dragon Age Origins has been one of the few constants in my life over the years. When everything else keeps changing and going haywire, Origins has stayed the same. The level of escapism that Origins offers is something that no other game can hold a candle to. Like when my brother passed away, it was without a doubt the hardest moment of my life thus far. For the first 2 weeks of my grief, my parents weren't around as they had to make a trip down to Mexico where he had unfortunately passed away, and unfortunately they had to identify him and claim him. I don't envy them having to do that, but anyway, like I said, they weren't around. So I was in a bad place. Sorry. I was tempted by a lot of things during that time. I mean, who wouldn't be? Emotionally vulnerable, left alone for a couple of weeks with a house all to yourself and a couple $100s to spend. I almost gave in lots of times to lots of different things. But just like all the other times in my life, Origins was there. For the duration of my playthroughs, those 2 weeks, and yes, I said playthroughs, as in multiple, no longer was I Wookiee, the, lonely guy who was struggling to keep it together despite the best efforts of his friends and parents. I was once again the hero of Ferelden, the man who, with the help of his friends, slayed the archdemon and saved the world. Like I said, this game provides some excellent escapism. That not-so-excellent segue brings me to the next section, the game's story and plot. The game takes place in a fantasy setting, as you may have guessed, and although the game has 6 origin stories, they all vary wildly and give you a different experience, both for the first part of the game, as well as all throughout the rest of the game, as different characters will react to you differently. But they all have one thing in common. They end with you becoming the newest recruit into the faction known as the Grey Wardens, a group of basically medieval superheroes, who are the ones responsible for defeating Darkspawn and ending the Blight every time it has occurred. After you and your first companion Alistair take part in a very important battle and unfortunately lose, you awaken to discover that the other Grey Wardens as well as the King are dead, thanks to the game's main antagonist Loghain quitting the field with his cavalry and leaving you all to die. The rest of the game is you and your various companions traveling the land, gaining help from various places, such as the Dwarves, the Elves, the Circle of Magi, and the Arl of Redcliffe, in order to form a new army, and eventually marching on the army of the Archdemon to slay him and end the Blight. The controls for the game are pretty good. You use the joysticks to move around and control the camera, and you use the various other buttons to target enemies, activate your various abilities, and navigate the menus. Even all these years later, the controls feel smooth and elegant. I never once felt like I was lagging or like the controls weren't responsive. I did constantly keep confusing the start and select button, but I think that's just me, especially since I still do it now, even in my playthroughs that I'm doing over on my gaming channel. The gameplay is the meat and potatoes of any game, and this game's gameplay is easily filet mignon and scalloped potatoes. The combat, while a bit slow at times, as you don't get to control every swing and strike your character makes like in some later games, it's essentially just like an auto attack thing. It's solid, very solid, and you of course have various abilities for each character alongside their basic attacks, which help to kind of not only speed up but like make the combat more engaging and like just kind of they just kind of help the combat basically. You also have the advantage of going into a tactical mode, something that I don't really use that often, but that I know is like a personal fan favorite of a lot of people. I had a blast controlling all the characters and using all their abilities. I also loved exploring the world and collecting various pieces of armor and weapons, which is arguably the best part. Couple that with deep dialogue options, the many different ways you can craft your story, and you have one hell of a game. The graphics are good, though I will say they definitely lag behind other games at the same time. Graphics has always been an area that Dragon Age has kind of lagged behind in a bit, in my opinion. But they're still good. They're still great. And with Origins, at least for me, there's just something about them that has remained timeless. I think that they look incredible, and quite frankly, I love them. I would essentially compare Origins graphics to something like Knights of the Old Republic, and I include 1 and 2 in that statement. Because even though, they've aged, they still look good. I don't know, Dragon Age, or I guess I should say BioWare, just has a habit for hitting these really, really sweet spots when it comes to some of their games. They make graphics that, despite the age years later, will still look fantastic. It's just something really, really hard to explain. I don't know. I don't quite know how to put it. The audio in this game is on point. They sound fantastic, especially in all the little details, like your characters walking and your weapon sounds. This is also another area where BioWare went all out to create as much of an immersive and unique world that the player can explore. For example, Dragon Age Origins features an orchestral soundtrack with a choir used both in-game and during cutscenes. How freaking cool is that? In addition, more than 140 voice actors worked on this game. The cast of characters has been described as the largest of any of BioWare's games at the time. And the main protagonist, however, was not voice acted, as the team hoped that the players would reflect their own inner voice when making decisions. Spoiler alert, I love this game. Even all these years later, and looking at the game with a proper critical eye, I still think it's amazing, and especially if you're a fan of RPGs. This would be a welcome addition to your library. Don't skip out on this. You need to try this at least once in your gaming adventures. Well, that does it for episode 1 of season 2. Can't believe we made it here, guys. I want to thank all of you for watching, and I hope to see you next time. Love, Wookiee.